The footage begins with static, handheld chaos. Reporters, volunteers, dogs, and floodlights drowning the woods in artificial daylight. The camera pans across dozens of faces until it lands on one. Steady, helpful, comforting. He's everywhere. Every interview, every search grid, every vigil. At first, the detectives thought he was just another overzealous volunteer, someone channeling grief into action. But that night, while reviewing the 10th replay of a televised plea, something in his behavior splintered the narrative. A pause too long, a glance too specific. One detective froze the frame and leaned closer. In that exact moment, the story turned inside out, and the mask began to crumble. Claire Renner's morning was built on patterns. Same coffee mug, same turn at the gas station, same playlist humming from the old sedan. When she failed to show for work, her absence rippled like a dropped stone. The phone went to voicemail. The door stood locked. What began as mild concern became panic by sunset. By nightfall, detectives walked through her living room, touching the edges of a life abruptly paused. Every object remained where it should be, except for one, the phone charger, missing from its socket. Within hours, social feeds lit up. Photos of Claire spread across town pages. Search volunteers met at the Riverside Park. Ryan Keller arrived before sunrise, clipboard in hand, calling names, dividing sectors. He'd only met Claire once, but his confidence filled the vacuum of leadership. Cameras captured his earnest speeches, his determined expression. The detectives, newly assigned, watched from a distance, grateful for organization, unaware they were watching the performance of guilt. Theories multiplied faster than evidence. A stranger in a white van. A possible hitchhike. An argument overheard. Detectives logged every claim, knowing most would collapse under daylight. Ryan Keller hovered at every station, offering coffee, pointing out possible areas, feeding information he pretended not to have. Each gesture painted him as compassionate, but beneath it, control pulsed like a quiet metronome. Near dusk, a scarf appeared. Ryan claimed he found it snagged on a thorn branch along a footpath no one had yet searched. It matched Claire's description perfectly, too perfectly. Eli took it gently, noting the soil clinging to the fibers. Dana's camera flashed once, capturing the moment. The scarf was logged, bagged, and labeled. But that night, under the cold fluorescence of the evidence room, the detectives noticed something small. The knot was tight, deliberate, not torn or snagged. Someone had tied it. The town's porches became checkpoints, each doorbell camera a 1-inch witness. In the grainy dusk of compressed video, dogs barked, mail arrived, sprinklers misted into nothing. And again, the same figure flickered at the edges, high-visibility vest, a clipboard, a face calibrated for concern. Neighbors gave times that almost matched, which is to say, they didn't. A porch light clock was 6 minutes fast. A backyard cam reset after a storm. An elderly couple swore they saw the victim's car pass twice, though traffic sounds suggested only one. Detectives stopped chasing certainty and started measuring drift. They tracked the ritual of a helpful man who always found a microphone, always stood where the light was best, always knew which cul-de-sacs were already covered. By late evening, the canvas felt less like collecting stories and more like reading stage directions. Every gesture a cue, every kindness a mark taped to the floor. Inside the lab, noise turned to numbers. The victim's phone drew a lopsided halo of pings around the river, graceful until it wasn't. An abrupt pinch where data vanished for 18 minutes before, reappearing in the same sector, as if time folded and smoothed itself. App logs contradicted alibis by seconds that mattered. A fitness app woke while the screen was off. A ride-share estimate was checked with no ride requested. A photo cache grew by one thumbnail, never saved to the gallery. The forensic analyst traced tower load like tides and corrected for a refraction, in a rainstorm that had bullied signals sideways. It felt pedantic until the pattern crystallized. The phone wasn't traveling. It was being staged, lifted, opened, glanced at, moved just enough to mimic normal life. The detective circled the gap on the timeline and wrote one word above it: hands. Not chance, hands. The town wanted a hero, and the edit obliged. The evening segment cut from candles to clipboards to a voice of assurance with immaculate teeth. A steady gaze and a line about hope sturdy enough to climb. Ratings rose, shares spread. The helper became a character with lower third graphics and a favorite angle. But television preserves more than faces. It traps environments. Behind the interviews, soft focus lived a thin metallic drone, easy to ignore until someone listened for it. The reporter's mic had caught the town's most recognizable hum, the constant undertone of a water treatment plant that sits where the river bends past a service road almost no one walks. Detectives marked it, not as proof, not yet, but as a scent. The segment did what it always does, simplified. Yet inside its simplification, something stubbornly complex hummed, pointing away from the story the town preferred. Maps multiplied until they felt like wallpaper. Grids in highlighter colors, string arcs between thumbtacks, zones shaded for safety. The volunteer tent ran like a small bureaucracy, with the helper dispensing assignments and certainty in equal measure. He spoke the language of coordination so fluently that few noticed what his grammar omitted. A narrow corridor along a drainage culvert, inconvenient to reach, messy to search, and somehow always scheduled for tomorrow. He cautioned about terrain, liability, time. No one wants to wander knee-deep in thorn and muck when a charismatic optimist points to drear ground. The detectives watched his fingers sweep the map like a metronome, skipping that same strip with practiced ease, and felt the beat of an absence. Logistics can look like leadership. They can also look like a locked door you mistake for a wall. The family offered a map without paper. Habits, aversions, shortcuts the victim trusted when weather turned mean. She hated the river path after rain, preferred the ridge road, never wore that scarf knotted tight, only looped it twice and let it fall. A favorite gas station, a superstition about even-numbered pumps, a way of double-clicking a lock that left the top deadbolt crooked by a millimeter. Small consistencies that outlasted bigger plans. As the public picture grew grander, the private one held steady, and the distance between them became a measurement. The detectives realized the search effort wasn't wrong because it was chaotic. It was wrong because it was curated. The town chased the story it had been fed. In that living room with grief settling like dust on framed photos, they marked a straight line through clutter, where she would not go, and who benefited from insisting she had. The car sat in the impound lot under sodium light, quiet, patient, and dishonest. On its surface, it offered nothing. Wiped handles, vacuumed mats, armor all gloss shining like a lie told too often. But deep within the weave of carpet and the air vents' throats, truth collected in dust. Forensic work isn't glamorous. It's monastic. Every lint, fragment, every hair filament carries a sermon. When the analyst lifted one abrasive particle, a single grain flecked with industrial silica, it refused to match the gravel from search zones. Instead, it echoed the soil composition of that skipped corridor. That 6mm crystal bridge collapsed the space between innocence and orchestration. The detectives didn't celebrate. They inhaled quietly, because proof rarely shouts. It murmurs. The gas station clock was wrong by 3 minutes and 41 seconds. That small lie, born of a lazy daylight-saving adjustment, had built an alibi. Keller's purchase looked innocent until Eli cross-referenced surveillance from the adjoining ATM, whose timestamp matched network time precisely. When adjusted, the alibi inverted. His car left before his receipt said it arrived. In the forensic lexicon, that's called temporal misalignment. In human language, It's called deceit. The detectives didn't announce the discovery. They let it breathe. A single missynced clock doesn't convict, but patterns do. And patterns are the handwriting of intent. It rained the night she vanished. Just enough to mark the ground, but not enough to cleanse it. The pattern of mud on Keller's boots defied the forecast. The east ridge had drained dry by evening. The corridor near the culvert stayed soaked until dawn. Mud remembers. Its chemistry is a diary. Mineral ratios, organic decay, the story of pressure and time. When the lab compared residue from Keller's boots to samples from search zones, one composition whispered, louder than the rest, fine silt heavy with algae spores, identical to the culvert's floodplain. That finding anchored everything. The detectives now possessed not just theory, but terrain. The ground itself had testified. Detectives returned to the news clip, the one that made Keller famous. When played through forensic software, background noise separated into layers. Wind, river, generators. And one frequency too constant to be coincidence. A low industrial drone, cycling every 4 seconds. They cross-matched it with municipal data and found a match. The water treatment plant air compressor logged at exactly that rhythm. The hum placed Keller's interview within shouting distance of the site he swore he'd never approached. He hadn't hidden the sound. He'd assumed no one would listen. But the air was honest when people went. The scarf returned for one last examination. It wasn't snagged. It was tied. The knot's structure revealed repetition, not panic. An over-under reef with a half-turn flourish, known to those who practice sailing or climbing. Keller's social posts, still cached online, displayed hobby photos, knotted cords, camp ropes, captions about precision. The detectives placed the scarf on the evidence table beside the boots, and map patterns converged like tributaries. In the silence that followed, the narrative inverted completely, from helpful to harmful, from searcher to suspect. The smallest of gestures, a knot, a step, a hum, had betrayed the entire performance. The newsroom clip rolls again, a loop worn thin by scrutiny. The camera tilts as a volunteer squeezes past the tripod, and for half a second, the frame sags to ground level, catching the helper from the ankles up. Not heroic, not lit. Just practical leather hikers packed with pale grit, the kind that collects in shallow channels where water slows and surrenders sediment. He'd sworn he stayed on ridge trails that night. Dry, leaf-littered, scuffed to a mat. But these souls shine with slurry, a crescent of mica, and sand pressed into sipes like a signature written blind. The detective pauses on the glint, that tiny meteor of truth lodged in rubber. The room narrows to the boots, not the plea, not the tears, the boots. People can control their faces. They rehearse hands, voices, posture. Feet tell the truth because they forget to perform. In that oversight, the story finally speaks. Charisma can masquerade it as competence long enough to build a following. Review the week, and a choreography emerges. He arrives first, positions tables, narrates purpose into any microphone within range. He remembers names, repeats them during instructions like benedictions, then edits geography with a smile that slopes a liability. We've got that sector covered. Safer to keep families near the river path. Each rationale plausible, each consequence identical. The culvert is deferred again. He anticipates questions and pre-answers them, pockets his phone when anyone mentions time, offers food to the camera crew, carries boxes for the family. It is a saturation campaign, a kindness that coats and steers. Detectives map it like weather. Barometric drops before every redirection. People thank him for leadership. The ledger shows control. Between intention and effect, a pattern appears, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. The glove should have told a cleaner story. Found by a helpful man on a path no one had searched, reported promptly, bagged ceremoniously, but contamination resists pageantry. Under the microscope, bloomed grains, lifted from a world the search had carefully not entered. Micromorphology, matching the culvert's alluvial fan. A sliver of filament clung inside the cuff like a confession. And the soil trapped in the seam carried algae markers that thrive only where water idles. The cascade begins. Shoes contradict alibi. Glove contradicts discovery. Map contradicts logistics. Lies rarely fail at the punchline. They fail in the connective tissue, where disparate scenes are stitched with guesswork. Detectives don't shout. They align. When the board lights up, shoe, glove, corridor, the narrative stops wobbling. Gravity returns to the room, and the performance starts to look like a blueprint. They walk it at dusk, boots whispering through reeds, flashlights feathering the culvert's mouth. This is the strip logistics avoided. Ankle-deep churn. Thorn hooks, a low tunnel where river breath turns metallic. The water treatment plant sighs in cycles, that familiar drone peaking every 4 seconds like a metronome for dread. The map on Ely's clipboard is no longer abstract. The blue vein is a wet finger laid against the town's wrist. Here, avoidance makes sense. Messy, slow, impossible to film beautifully. And here, the sediment is right. The smell is right. The physics are right. Dana marks distances, photographs scuffs, squats to pocket a sample where boot tread has lifted a skin of silt. In the near dark, it's easy to imagine how a performer would steer an audience away. In the mud, it's impossible to imagine innocence in those shoes. Consensus doesn't arrive with applause. It settles, heavy and private, in the space between colleagues. Back at the van, the board carries 3 magnets in a new alignment. Shoes, glove, corridor. No revelation is singular. Each depends on the others until resistance thins. Dana says it first, almost to the glass. He's not helping us search. He's helping himself not be found. Ely says nothing, which is its own declaration. They rehearse the next moves without naming the suspect. Controlled leaks, a decoy briefing, a judge who dislikes theater. Outside, generators thrum. Inside, the room stills, as if weather has paused. The mask isn't ripped off. It's withdrawn by inches, a hand returning to its owner. When they step back into the cold, the case has changed shape. The town will be the last to know. The river already knows. Misdirection works best when it flatters the target. The detectives draft a briefing as carefully as a stage script. A confident update about cadaver dogs responding upriver, a hint that divers will work the marina at dawn, and a casual aside about a volunteer-led sweep of the ridge. None of it true, all of it plausible. The words are bait. The room is a tank. They deliver it at dusk when cameras are hungry and volunteers restless, making sure the helper has a front row view. He nods too eagerly, asks the right questions, then repeats the answers louder for those in back. While he broadcasts the false map, the real one contracts quietly toward the culvert. Inside the van, a clock face is taped over. No timestamps in the footage that will matter. They're not chasing him anymore. They're shaping the wind, waiting to see which way his performance bends when the weather changes. The trick to cracking a routine is to scratch the record and listen for what the song does. Minutes after the decoy, the helper pivots hard. He diverts 2 teams from the ridge he's promoted all week, declares the marina overstaffed, and personally escorts a handful of fresh volunteers toward an entirely new direction that paradoxically leads nowhere. Busy work ends nowhere. Reflective vests. He speaks faster now and smiles wider, managing optics while the plan beneath his feet unravels by design. The detectives watch the overcorrection bloom. Sudden generosity with flashlights and granola bars, surprise phone calls in earshot, and insistence on staying late to lock up the tent. The more he steers, the smaller his options get. Patterns don't like being watched. They either calcify or crack. Tonight, under cold sodium light, his fractures glitter like the grit he once thought no one would see. Quiet replaces spectacle in courthouse corridors. The paper they bring doesn't thunder. It stacks. Affidavits distill a week's worth of dust and hum into probable cause. Mismatched soil, clock drift, a knot that knows more than panic. The judge reads longer than expected, fingers steepled, the room breathing with the HVAC's steady sigh. When the stamp lands, the sound is small but absolute, while the helper corrals optics at the tent. A second team fits latex over purpose and walks to his car. Soft footfalls on wet concrete. The warrant blossoms. Phone, boots, the vest he never takes off, the truck bed liner that hides more truth than dirt. No cuffs, not yet. Just a conversation at the edge of the light and the slow open of a hatch. Extraction is a ritual of ordinary gestures. Catalog, bag, seal, sign. The moment feels less like a raid and more like gravity, remembering what to do. Truth becomes undeniable when two strangers begin finishing each other's sentences. Soil and silica, grit and geometry. Back in the lab, the abrasive particle from the sedan meets its twin from the truck liner. Under cross-polarized light, both flash the same cold spectrum. A fingerprint of crushed culvert, aggregate mixed with micromica from the berm. In the same breath, a smear lifted from the vest's hem swabs positive for algae common only in standing water near the plant's outfall. The map shrinks from town to channel to meter. The room doesn't cheer. It exhales. Cases rarely hinge on single miracles. They tighten through echoes. Here, every echo lands on the same surface. The place he insisted no one should bother to search. The chain is now a chain, not beads. The next step is not bold. It is careful, slow, and inevitable. Night returns to the corridor that performance tried to erase. Flashlights skim water black as spent oil. Reeds chatter like teeth. They move with reverence and economy. No speeches, no cameras invited. The search line is small by design. Fewer feet, fewer mistakes, each step a promise kept to a family whose hope has already learned new verbs. The air carries metal and riverweed. The plant's compressor counts the seconds like an old clock. When the beam hits disturbed silt at the culvert's lip, the world narrows to the size of a gloved hand reaching down. Silence becomes a presence rather than an absence, expanding until it holds everything that follows. Procedure takes over because it must cordon, document, recover. While private grief stands a respectful distance away, already beginning its endless work. The case crosses an invisible threshold. From now on, the living owe the truth to the dead. Interviews are not battles. They are weather systems. The room is the pressure front, the fluorescent buzz the wind, and patience the gravity that pulls the storm together. He sits where dozens have sat. Hands folded, expression curated to look uncurated. They offer water, not because thirst matters, but because ritual does. The first questions are small stone skipping. Where he parked, who he called, why he stayed late to lock the tent. He answers smoothly until language betrays him. Asked how he knew the scarf was hers, he says, "I put it. Found it by the branch." The pronoun stumbling over its own feet before correcting course. No one flinches. Silence is the second interviewer. It takes the chair at the table and leans in. A clock ticks from somewhere unseen. By the time they circle the missing 18 minutes, his sentences have grown shorter and heavier, like boots filling with water. Truth is rarely a straight line. It's a braided river forced into channels by banks of corroboration. On a projection wall, minutes turn to topography. A card for the receipt, an arc for the cell ping. a strip of security footage stitched between them like a narrow bridge. The detectives narrate the night with the steadiness of cartographers. No flourish, only landmarks. Gas pump clock drift, app wake. Camera angle, the hum that keeps time like a pulse under the town. Where he claimed to be, the map thins. Where he avoided, the lines grow dense, weighted by particles and algae, and a knot that belongs to habit, not panic. He watches the board perform its quiet arithmetic and feels the subtraction of options. When the missing 18 minutes slot into the culvert's mouth, the gap is no longer absence. It is location. They do not accuse. They point, and the geography does the rest. Grief is heavy. Betrayal is volatile. The town that applauded speeches now scrolls in stunned silence, watching last week's hero reframe into this week's suspect. Candles gutter in kitchen sinks. Posters curl at the edges. The group chat that once organized thermoses and flashlights erupts into competing memories. He carried boxes. He hugged the sister. He cried on camera. Each detail now radioactive with doubt. In living rooms, people choose sides not because the facts are unclear, but because they were comforting. The detectives do not manage feelings. They manage information. A statement goes out. Measured, spare, free of adjectives. The void left by certainty fills with talk radio callers and righteous paragraphs. The family, already living in a smaller, colder universe, closes the blinds and turns off the TV. Outside, the river keeps its rhythm, indifferent to optics and outrage. Arrest is less a climax than a pivot, paperwork meeting consequence. They choose a morning that offers no crowd, no stage. He steps from his doorway into a light that isn't theatrical, just winter pale, and meets two detectives who greet him as they always have. Names spoken plainly, voice volume unchanged. The words that follow are ceremonial and exact. The cuffs are neither rushed nor displayed. A neighbor's trash truck groans past, indifferent. Cameras arrive 30 seconds late, which is to say on time for everything except the moment that matters. He looks right, then left, searching for a lens to confess to, finding only brick and air. The performance that once shaped the search now finds no audience to feed it, only a chain of custody that begins with wrists and ends with evidence sealed and logged. When the car door closes, the sound is soft. Gravity does not need to shout. Narratives falter. Inventories daunt. In a room without adjectives, they lay the case out in plain geometry. Particle to particle, boot to silt, knot to habit, hum to map, time to place. Each item strips speculation from the story like old paint. Culvert grit that twins across vehicles, algae that only grows where water idles, a scarf tied with a flourish incompatible with panic, a timestamp corrected by a clock that never cared about alibis. No speech tries to make it tragic or grand. The labels are enough. The detectives stand back and let the chain speak in the voice bureaucracy prefers. Numbered, signed, sealed. Outside the door, a hallway murmurs with the next steps. Charging decisions, court calendars, victim notifications. Inside, the air feels denser, as if the room has remembered weight. Some truths you argue. Some you arrange and live with. Courtrooms are designed to remove emotion through architecture. Everything in them insists on perspective. Raised benches, measured distances, words bound by procedure. The air smells of old varnish and photocopy toner. The case file arrives thinner than the story, but heavier than belief. No cameras now, just transcribers catching silence between sentences. He sits in profile. The same posture he once offered the public, yet the context drains its charm. The prosecution's rhythm is factual, unemphatic. Timestamps, soil, not logic, hum analysis. The defense doesn't deny. It dilutes, painting coincidence as corrosion. But evidence doesn't bruise. It corrodes back. When the verdict lands, it sounds like paper, not thunder. The family's faces are unreadable by design. They've learned that closure is a metaphor, not an event. The detectives don't cheer. They stand in the hallway and exhale the months out of their bones. Grief, when it settles, becomes a craft. Folding, storing, tending. The family chooses a small gathering. No media, no vigil hashtags. Only those who knew Claire beyond her absence. They return her things to places that can bear them. The ceramic fox to the bookshelf. The scarf to a cedar box lined with fabric that still carries her perfume. Words are few. The detectives attend but stay apart, understanding that presence sometimes speaks louder when silent. In the hush, Lena places a single candle by the river's edge and lets it drift. It does not float long. The current takes it quick and clean, bending light into the water until flame and reflection merge. Not an ending, just a moment where everything is briefly, impossibly still. When people ask what tipped the case, they expect drama, a confession, a chase, a flourish. The detectives know better. It wasn't a weapon or witness. It was a pattern of pretending, a choreography of empathy practiced too well. Evil often auditions as competence. The cost of performance is authenticity, and its collapse leaves a vacuum no applause can fill. They review footage for debrief, not nostalgia, measuring how long they let belief guide them. Dana notes the pause before Keller's pronouns slip. Eli notes his own silence when instinct sparked. They speak quietly about bias, about how trust and spectacle share the same muscles. The footage pauses on the vigil. Candles, microphones, his arm around the sister. It is impossible to tell where the act ended and the truth began. Maybe it never did. Every search begins with faith. Faith in neighbors, in process, in the idea that visibility equals virtue. The case teaches otherwise. The lesson isn't paranoia. It is attention. Evil rarely hides in shadows anymore. It hides in spotlights, behind causes, beneath competence. Investigators call it proximity bias, the mind's way of forgiving what feels familiar. For communities, the takeaway is simple but hard. Verify before you trust. Listen past the loudest voice. Remember that help and control sometimes wear the same clothes. For detectives, humility becomes a tool sharper than suspicion. For the rest of us, the story stands as proof that vigilance doesn't kill compassion. It protects it. The next time someone organizes hope too perfectly, look at their shoes. Rewind to the beginning. The freeze frame, the televised plea, the helper haloed by hope. Now watch it again, knowing what you know. The smile flickers too long. The shoes glint wrong. The eyes track the wrong direction. Awareness changes nothing for the past, but everything for the future. The detectives close the file. Label it not as closure, but as a compass. A reminder that truth is often visible, just unrecognized. The footage cuts to black mid-breath, like the story itself refusing neatness. Evil never looked monstrous here. It looked busy, helpful, ordinary. The film ends not on punishment but perception, an invitation to see better, sooner. In the last frame, the paused image of Keller fades into grain, and in its ghosted outline appears the reflection of the two detectives watching, their faces lit by the faintest hope that recognition counts for something.